and this is where it's really important. It's not about trying to win over the hearts and minds of those that we may never win over. It's about bolstering the hearts and minds of the people who are already there or who are looking for it, right?
Lounging, son.
Interview for you guys. I have David Walker, the writer of Bitterroot, Power Man and Iron Fist, Nighthawk, Naomi. He's on co-writer in Young Justice right now. He does solid comics, and as his zine will tell you, he's a badass mofo.
How you doing?
Doing great, dude. Doing great. So it's been a while since we talked. You have been a very busy guy. Very busy since I talked to you last. Naomi hadn't even dropped. I think Bitterroot 1 had just come out. So I just wanted to talk to you first about solid comics.
Yeah.
You did one fall with Brett Weldell. The Hated is coming out, which I can't wait to finally have in my hands with Sean Hill. I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about those projects. How they came to be.
Yeah, they were. Wow. I'm in the middle of fulfilling all the rewards for the Hated right now, so I'm like, why did I do this? You know, I love comics. I love the medium of comics, but I'm not always enthralled with the industry itself. And I like creator-owned stuff. And the problem with doing creator-owned stuff is that a lot of publishers that you choose to work with, aside from Image, it's not really creator-owned. Most publishers will take a good chunk of your intellectual property rights. They don't give you any sort of advance. The royalty structure is really poor, and so you end up doing a lot of work and not getting much ownership out of that work. And so I've been looking at the Kickstarter model for a long time, and it seemed pretty interesting to me. So I figured I would try it with One Fall. Actually, with both One Fall and the Hated, there were offers from publishers, but they really kind of sucked, you know. So, and with One Fall, Brett and I had been putting this thing together so long, and we'd had like these, we'd done sample pages and we'd done a couple pitches, and at some point we were like 10 pages. We'd done like 10 sample pages, which is nearly half of an issue. So I was just like, look, dude, you know, if let's just put out this first issue ourselves, and I'll, you'll just get paid out of the Kickstarter money, which is what we did. And I've been dragging ass on that second issue, to be honest with you. It's been it is not Brett's fault at all. It's like it's 110% mine. And then it was similar with the Hated, in that I didn't want to give up ownership or even partial ownership to a publisher. And there's a lot of publishers weren't, they felt like, oh, this might be too controversial. This might be a little too edgy for us. So there was that. And then Sean Hill was the artist that I'm working with, was just working at a pace that we both knew we couldn't meet a monthly schedule. And so I was just like, because originally it was supposed to be an original graphic novel. It was just supposed to be one longer piece. And at some point I was just like, look, I'll just break it up into multiple issues, and that way we can get it out, because I didn't want to wait till the entire thing was done. And I think for him, now that he's seen the completed pages and it's done, now he's like reinvigorated. And so I'm hoping to have the second issue of One Fall and the second issue of the Hated done and out this year, I should say. But man, this doing it yourself, I sometimes forget how difficult it can be.
Yeah, I mean, I loved One Fall. I've been watching the Hated from the minute Sean Hill started putting up those first images on his Facebook, man. I was like, what is this? What is this book that I kept seeing him draw? And then finally you announced it. So I'm very excited to finally get a chance to read that.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, where did the name Solid Comics come from? Like, how did you come up with that title, the logo? Did you design it yourself?
I came up with the initial design for it, for the logo itself, and then I hired somebody out to like do it for real because I can do like little crappy thumbnail sketches. The name came from a very long time ago. I published an anthology, and that anthology was called Solid, and it was man, who was, I can't even remember everybody who was part of it. It was myself, the Love Brothers, Keith Knight did a piece in it, and Spike Trotman did a piece in it, and I was trying to come up with a name for the anthology, and I was going to call it like Badass Mofo Comics or something like that. And then Jerry Williams, who was one of the contributors, was like, hey, this is a really solid book, and I was like, huh. And I think he actually said you should call it Solid, and I was like, okay. And so that just kind of stuck in my head. And this was like 2002 or 3 maybe that we did this anthology. And as I was thinking about putting together my own little publishing empire, I was like, what's a good name for it? And it was like, oh, I'll call it Solid, and then maybe it will actually become solid as opposed to this mushy, flabby thing that's kicking my ass, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see what else you guys put out. The logo's fucking dope. I
Yeah.
thought so the minute I saw it. And it, like I said earlier, this isn't your first time self-publishing.
Nope.
I didn't know about the anthology, but you did the Badass Mofo zine for a while. I know you did some journalism interviews and stuff in there too, reviews, right?
Yep.
From what I remember last time you told me.
Yep.
What do you find most rewarding? I know you said it's a little bit difficult self-publishing, but what do you find most rewarding about like really doing it all yourself?
It's it's a very interesting thing because it's like the entire process of doing it yourself is pretty rewarding, but it's also super frustrating. So like with the Hated, I have a crew of friends who help me out on with One Fall, where we got together, we packaged everything, we slapped postage on everything, and but because of the pandemic and social distancing, we couldn't do any of that, and so I planned ahead, and I was like, okay, I'm going to get my own printer that can print out postage, and I'm going to sign up for one of these services, and but like the other day, man, I couldn't get the printer to work. It took hours to get this thing to work properly. And then I started printing out postage for these packages that need to go out. And the entire time I was thinking, this doesn't seem like enough. This seems really inexpensive. And I got through 60 of them, and I was like, I better stop just in case, and I bought the postage, I printed it out online. And then it turns out that all 60 of them it's the wrong amount of postage. So now I got to figure out how to buy more postage, put it on this envelope, got to figure out how much it's going to cost.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this moment while I was doing all this, like this is like last night at like close to midnight. And I was like, man, this is like, other people don't have to do this. There's like, there's departments at other publishers that do this shit, that handle, making sure that there's enough for postage. And I was just like, I was so pissed. And then I thought to myself, well, this is the price you pay for having control. This is the price you pay for setting your own schedule. And then it didn't feel that bad. It's like, okay, what I'll do is I'm not going to print out any more postage. I'm going to go to an actual post office and find out how much more I owe for these packages, pay for those, and then, because there's over 1,000 packages that have to go out, right? So, and there's these are the things you don't necessarily think about. You're writing a title. I don't care if you're writing for Marvel or DC, or if you're writing something creator-owned for Image. You don't think about how much it costs to ship that. You don't think about what kind of paper stock are they going to. Well, some people think about paper stock, but most of us don't necessarily think about, I wonder what kind of paper they're going to use. I wonder, everything, all that sort of stuff that comes along with it. And so the rewarding part, to answer your question, is a very long answer, is it comes in phases. Like when I picked up when I pick up comics from the printer and I see them and I'm holding them in my hand, I'm like, wow, this is this is an amazing feeling. I forget about all the heartache and headache that went into making it. When I go to the post office and I've dropped off 700-800 packages, and it's like, oh, and I'm looking at the receipt, but it feels good, and then when I start hearing from people, so it's a lot of it is like, is the after is afterwards. It's like nobody likes, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but most people don't like cooking the meal, but they enjoy eating the meal, right? So it's the after meal moments that I prefer the most. And then it's time to do the dishes, and then it sucks again. So
yeah, the shipping. I mean, I've been selling a lot of my stuff on eBay because of quarantine too.
yeah,
Some of my collection just for extra money. So I know the struggle
yeah,
of packaging shit,
yeah.
so I
No,
feel you on that.
and I got a scale, and it clearly wasn't calibrated properly because I was weighing everything, and it all came back the same. And I was okay. And I do the postage, and then in the back of my head there was this voice. I had printed out the 60th label, right? 60. And I was like, and I said, I was like, man, there's like still 800 more of these to go. You better make sure. You better really make sure. So I got the scale out again, and I measured something, and I weighed something. I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. This can't be right. Like, and then I grabbed a bunch of the other packages, and they all weigh basically the same, right? Every single one was like, suddenly it was a different weight, and I was like, I can't believe this. And all that shit, like stamps.com and all that stuff, they make it sound like it's really easy, and it is not. It is like
I know, I don't even deal with that stuff. I just take it straight to the post office. I'm like, you wait. You tell me how much I need to pay you.
I did that with one fall. I did that, and I knew I probably wasn't going to be able to do that with the Hated. And then when the pandemic hit, I was like, the last thing I want to do is bring hundreds and hundreds of packages. Even if I break it up into multiple trips, I don't want to spend hours in the post office,
Oh, no.
wearing a mask. I'd be like, it would kill me. So, so I knew I was planning on likely doing it this way, even before the pandemic. I was thinking, if I don't do like a stamps.com sort of thing, I'm going to have to pay somebody to just do it for me, to literally go to the post office and wait in line. And then I was like, this will be easier. Just get this thing. And I did. And in the long run, it'll be fine. But and these are the lessons you learn along the way, right? You learn like the printer that I use is local. And that was purely, that was my preference when I was doing One Fall. I wanted to do something local. And then with the Hated, I was happy with the job the printer did, so I decided to go back to them. And it's like, yeah, if I wasn't working with a local printer, like I'd be kind of screwed right now, because everything, again, the pandemic has screwed so many things up, and it's made even some basic communication has become difficult. So you learn these things along the way, and one of the things that I learned was the process that my printer uses, and the paper stock that they use is a little bit heavier than a lot of other stuff I see coming out of Kickstarter, and it looks better and it feels better, and the cost difference isn't that bad until you start shipping, because they weigh a little bit more, and people are like, oh, well, how big of a difference is that? And I'm like, well, it's like maybe 10 cents more to ship it. And they're like, well, 10 cents isn't that bad. And then it's like, yeah, but if you're shipping 1,500 packages, that 10 cents adds up. And this is the crap. Again, if you're writing for, you're writing Luke Cage over at Marvel, you're not thinking about, how heavy is this book actually going to weigh? So, yeah, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. But again, no one's forcing me to do this, and I feel, especially with the way the industry is right now, in terms of there's a lot of retailers that are suffering, and a lot that are going out of business, and there's who knows what's happening with Diamond, and DC is like can't seem to make up their mind. It's like we're broken up. No, we're not.
Yeah.
And people not having as much for disposable income to buy comics. I think it's crucial that as creators, we rethink a lot of what we're doing, and we have to, right? I mean, like a perfect example of this is there, at least in 2020, there's not going to be any conventions.
Yeah.
The convention season was shut down before it officially started, which is usually Emerald City or C2E2. And so even for myself, it's like I had purchased copies of every book I have in preparation for the 2020 convention season. And I usually do 2 or 3 purchases a year. I usually do one in, say, January, and then another one in May. And then if I have to, I'll do another one later in the year. It's just to make sure I always have stock on hand. And this is whether it's copies of Bitterroot or Power Man and Iron Fist or Cyborg. And then I'm sitting on all that crap right now. It's like $3,000-$4,000 worth of comics and trade paperbacks that are just like, they ain't going nowhere,
Yeah.
And so when it came time to like print the Hated, that was one of the things I thought about, was like, oh yeah, I would normally print an extra 1,000. Do I want to do that? Because that extra 1,000 is this is what I take with me convention to convention to convention. This is what I sell there. And, like realistically, when's the next convention, I'm going to go to? When's the next convention anyone's going to get to go to? And how are they going to be spending money at these shows, right? Because I think about like how many conventions people go to, and they're going for this celebrity photo ops, right? And it's like I don't care how hard up, former Power Rangers are. I don't think a lot of them are going to be posing for selfies, there's a there's a vaccine,
Yeah. It's just so funny that you say that cracks me up. I mean, I go for the creators. That's the only reason I go to comic book conventions. Like the other stuff, that's cool, man. But like, no, I want to meet the creators. That's why it's called a comic book convention. It's not called a pop culture convention,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're gonna reach out to any stores to carry the Hated. I don't know how many extra you have, but hit up Collector's Paradise, and when I work there, I know you've signed there. I met you in person there. I know we'd love to have the book in the shop. I'll hand sell that book.
Yeah, there's a few. There's some retailers that have already bought it, and I've got a list. And it's that's the other thing too, is like I have a different appreciation for the retail side of things now that I've gone into self-publishing. And some of it I've always understood, but there's that understanding of how little room there is for profit on anybody's part, right? You're talking about these pamphlets for the most part that they cost X amount of dollars to print and ship. So you've got to make that amount of money back, right? And then you've got, the distributor, Diamond, for the most part, they're trying to make their cut. The publisher wants to make their cut, and then the retailer's got to make their cut. And it's like, there ain't much money left, It's you're looking at $4 for a comic, which just and I'm guilty of it. I've had to do it. It's like, I don't want to charge this much for a comic. I certainly don't want to pay this much for a comic. And the Hated is spendier than I wanted it to be, but it's it's 40 pages of full content, and I'm still trying to figure out the best way, because digital hasn't salvaged that part of it. It's like most digital comics cost the same as physical books, and there's just not that many people. Like, it didn't take off the way we thought it was going to.
Right.
And so
all
still
right.
lessons every day.
All right, let's get into one of my favorite books coming out, Bitterroot.
Yeah.
I fucking love that book. I loved it from day one. The minute I heard the setting, the mix of what it was about, I mean, you and Sanford, I spoke to you both right before or right around the first issue, and I'm like, I need this in my life. And I think it's a really important book in today's climate.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to say that, you know. I think
They
the
shit
fact,
show it.
yeah, I think the fact that right around the time that the movement was sweeping the country, Bitterroot and Excellence, two of
Yeah.
my favorite books, dropped that week. You guys are nominated for an Eisner. You have
Yeah.
a movie deal. I mean, it just seems like there's no limit to the success. I was wondering why do you think about it draws audiences in?
I don't know. That's a good question, because if I knew for sure, I would just do it again, right? I do more of these. Um, I think that, between Chuck, myself, and Sanford, we've put a lot of our heart and soul into it. Sanford has a very dynamic way of creating visuals, and I think that can't be underestimated. Um, this is a visual medium, and they say don't judge a book by its cover, but our covers have been pretty amazing, both the regular covers and the variants. And so I think that's definitely a huge part of it, and I think I would never downplay that, the visual aspect of it, the art. I think in terms of the story, it's there's we're touching upon stuff in some ways. It's been touched upon before, for sure. People have dealt with issues of race and racism and oppression in other mediums before. But I think that there's I can only speak for myself. I don't want to speak for Sanford or Chuck, but I'm writing Bitterroot, and I'm contributing to Bitterroot in a way that is trying to put something out there that I've always wanted to see but have never seen before. And going all the way back to my childhood when I was reading comics and enjoying them, but never quite getting what I wanted out of them. And with every project I've worked on at this point, I've tried to do at least a little bit of that, whether it was when I was working on Cyborg at DC, working with Bendis right now on Young Justice, and when we were on Naomi. For me, there's this feeling of okay, well, I've made it this far in life and this far in my career. If I can't start really trying to infuse some of what I really needed, because and thinking that if I needed this, if I wanted this, other people had to wanted it too. Other people needed it too. And and you got to be careful, because there's some really horrible things out there that some people think everybody wants, and then we don't. But that was it. It was really I love, and I always come back to this. One of my favorite movies of all time is Night of the Living Dead, George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. And I saw that. I was pretty young the first time I saw it, and it struck me at the time that I was watching a monster movie that was about more than just monsters, right? I knew there was more to it there. I could just feel it in my gut. And that movie, I was so enthralled with that movie that I went out and got issues of Fangoria and anything I could get, and I'm reading about it. And that really informed my belief that storytelling should be multi-layered, and that there should be the baseline entertaining story that people sit back and watch. And with Night of the Living Dead, it's a group of people trapped in a farmhouse while the living dead come after them, right? But then there's those underlying themes that if you want to look hard enough, you can see them, and so then you can be entertained on multiple levels. And that's what I want to do with everything that I do. And sometimes we get into arguments over Bitterroot, because I'm like, no, 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 no. This is either this is too right on the nose. We've got to, we've got to craft this message a little bit more. Or sometimes I'm like, yeah, there's nothing here. It's just people fighting, and that gets really boring after a while.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you guys have had some changes, not just in coloring. I know you brought Sophie Dodgen on.
Yeah.
Rico Renzi was the colorist on Volume 1. But you added one of my favorite editors in comic books. You added Shelly Bond into the mix. And I know that she had said to me when I talked to her that Sanford had reached out to her. But she told me what a huge fan of your work she is.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, how has that helped the process? Has it changed the way that the book is being produced. You know,
Yeah.
having somewhat of her stature on the book.
Oh, it's changed it immeasurably, to be honest with you. You know, we were Heather Antos had been our earliest editor, although she wasn't our first editor. We've had some troubles along the way with editors. And as a team, we definitely have ego problems, and I'm probably the worst on the team. So, um, but Heather left because she got a job at Valiant, and so we were struggling. We were looking for somebody. We found someone. We thought it was going to work out. It didn't, and so we were getting pretty desperate to find a new editor. And so I reached out to Lauren Sankovich, who's a friend of mine and works for MilkFed, and she's the editor for like Matt Fraction and Kelly Sue DeConnick. And I begged her. I was like, please, can you just stick it out for one issue with us, because we got to get this issue out. And she was like, I'm really busy, but you should ask Shelly Bond. And I hadn't, I'd only met Shelly once for like 2 minutes at a convention, and her reputation to me was like huge and larger than life. And so I called Sanford and I said, ask Shelly Bond if she wants to do it. And he's like, she'll never do it. And I was like, we won't know till we ask, and we need somebody. So he asked her, and I'll be 100% honest. I don't want to speak for Sanford or Chuck, but I feel like she saved the book. We were disheartened over the fact that we were having trouble finding a publisher, or not a publisher, an editor, I should say. And Chuck was hard at work on the Stump, his new title, On the Stump. And I was working on a couple other things, and it felt like we were drifting apart as a team. And I joke about our egos, but we really do. It's we're an ego-driven team for sure. And we needed somebody. I felt we needed somebody that would stand up to all three of us, and that if we were bullying them, and I want to be very careful how I say this, because I don't think we ever intentionally bully anybody, but we're creatives, right? And we get it in our heads that it has to be this way, and that can become very forceful. I knew we needed somebody that would stand up to us and ask questions and push us harder than we'd ever been pushed, and that was Shelly. And I think that the second arc of Bitterroot is way better than the first. And she came on board after, issue 6 was already in the can when she came on board, and then she helped us whip it into shape a little bit better. And then she's been ride or die ever since. And as we're moving into the third arc, it's like I can't imagine Bitterroot without her. And this isn't meant to, knock Heather or Joe, who was briefly with us, or any of the other editors I've worked with, because I've worked with some amazing editors over the years. I've never felt like the editor is more of a team member than on this particular book. And Shelly's the best. Like I call her the brick because she's so tough, right? But like as I think about future projects, I think about how can I hire Shelly? How can I work with her? And this is the truth. The Hated, Shelly had nothing to do with the Hated, right? Except I have this one of my weaknesses as a writer, that I've tried to catch on every project I do, but sometimes it gets away from me. Shelly was like hammering me hard on it with Bitterroot, and she was like, you keep doing this. And I was like, oh man, yeah, I'm sorry. I and other editors have caught it, so I know that it's a problem. And Bitterroot came back from the letterer, and it was like, oh God, I've done this thing again that I didn't intentionally do, but I wasn't working with an editor here. And so, and that's part of the reason why The Hated is a little bit later than I want it to be, because the book was 100% drawn, 100% lettered, and then I rewrote it. I rewrote the dialogue on probably like 60% of the book, and wow. It's all Shelly's fault. It's all because she really helped me see, she helps me see what my weaknesses are as a writer, and in seeing those weaknesses, I'm turning that around, turning those weaknesses into strengths. So yeah, and I'll tell her this to her face. She is intimidating, and she can be mean, and not mean, just stern. She's like, if I was wanted to be an editor, if I wanted to do that, I realize she's the person I would want teaching me how to do it. Like she's that good at it.
That's so funny that you say that, because that's exactly what I want to do. I want to, like, because I'm not I'll be honest. Like, first of all, I can't draw.
Yeah.
And my writing, for some reason, like, I get ideas, but I just can't put it down to paper. You know, like when I start to look at a paper, I just can't do anything. And I'm like, what about editing comics? I think that would be a good way to maybe learn that side. And I've even said, like, I want to learn from Shelly Bond. You know, like, she's one of the first editors that I noticed the name in a comic book when I started paying attention to that stuff. Who's this edited by? And I kept seeing her name on all my favorite stories, and I'm like, I want to talk to her, you know?
Yeah.
And she's so fucking cool, dude. She's awesome.
She is really cool.
Yeah. But speaking of, you said you guys are working on volume 3 of Bitterroot. Is this a series that could just potentially keep going and going? Do you guys have some sort of an end goal for the series?
We're working towards wrapping up the specific story that we're telling in this third arc, leaving it open enough that we could do more if we wanted to later on down the road. And I think on any given week, each of us has a different concept of like how much longer we want to work on this book, and when how we want to take breaks. I think for me, one of the things I keep coming back to is we don't know what the comic industry is going to look like a year from now or 2 years from now in terms of what retailers are going to be, how many retailers are going to be open, how much people are going to be spending on their comics. And so I feel like we need to be pretty open to how and what we do with that third arc, and honestly, as much as I love working on Bitterroot, there's other things that I want to do, and I get the sense, and I'm saying this right now, talking to you right now. Tomorrow, I probably have a totally different, response. But I know like Chuck is doing really well with On the Stump, and so I think that there's other things that we want to explore as individuals, and the problem is, and I say problem pretty loosely, that comics isn't the most lucrative of professions. So working on something like Bitterroot isn't going to help you raise your family as well as you'd like to, so you have to look at other things. And in fact, I even said I haven't talked to Chuck about this, but like maybe about a week ago, I was on the phone with Sanford about something else, and I said to him, how do you feel about after the second arc is done, we take like 6 months off, and me and Chuck pitch a mini series to either DC or Marvel, and he was like, well, why? We're on a roll. We should get Bitterroot out there. And I was like, honestly, because, I said, this is a business question, because, since none of us are doing conventions, since we know generally how much we're going to make from doing an image book, the three of us really need to find something that's going to pay the bills for a little while. And that's the only explanation, is like, it's got to be Marvel or DC. 100% honestly, if I thought Archie could pay a decent rate, I would much rather do an Archie title with Chuck and Sanford than I would a Marvel or DC one, just because I think it would be more fun and challenging. But so these are the sort of things that I'm thinking about as part of the team. It's like, okay, I know Chuck's got his family and Sanford's got his family, and how can we pay those bills? How can we take care of our people and take care of our cast and characters on Bitterroot? So we'll see. I think I know we have a big team meeting coming up really soon, and we're going to talk about some of this stuff. So, and I have no idea what. I know what I would like to do as a team, and I know what publisher I'd like to work with, and I know what characters I'd like to work with. I don't think Sanford or Chuck would have any interest in doing it, though. So I'd like the three of us to do a relaunch of Challengers of the Unknown for DC,
So,
and
oh
I
yeah.
think that we would do it. And this isn't to knock any of the other versions of that title that's been done over the decades, but I just think that there's like some great opportunities there that haven't been explored, and I think that three of us could do something really interesting. And I think that it's close enough to the Bitterroot ideas that it's like we could bring some of our Bitterroot fans over, and then could convert new Challengers of the Unknown fans over to Bitterroot. We could feed off of it, because that was the other thing I was thinking about. It's like, okay, what are titles at Marvel or DC? What are properties at Marvel or DC that are sort of in line with what we're doing with Bitterroot? Because it wouldn't make much sense. As much as I'd love to do Howard the Duck, I don't think that would be right for us as a team, or in line with whatever it is that however people see Bitterroot. And that's, I think that's pretty crucial. And as a team, these are the things we should be thinking about.
Yeah, makes sense. I wanted to jump into a little more serious of a topic. I know you've always been pretty outspoken on the hard subjects. I don't think you ever shy away from talking about important stuff that's going on, and it's one of the reasons I have a huge amount of respect for you. With the state of the country the way it is, how important do you think diversity and representation is in comics now more than ever?
Well, I think that it's always been important. I sometimes feel like if it had been treated with more importance 30, 40, 50 years ago, then maybe we wouldn't have some of the idiots that we have running around right now, right? Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily know if I become concerned that there's just a lot of preaching to the choir. There's so much tribalism going on. I feel like if I say in a comic, if I have a character say Black Lives Matter, or they're wearing a shirt that says Black Lives Matter or whatever, or I put that agenda forth in my comic, the people who are going to appreciate it are going to appreciate it and get it and understand it. And the people who are going to say, well, all lives matter, are still going to say all lives matter. Like, I don't see comics or film or TV converting people, which is it's a very sad and cynical thing to say. But I feel like if it was going to do it, it would have done it by now, right? And so therein lies the problem. Is like I like that stuff in my entertainment up until a point. There is a point where I'm like, okay, yeah, this is too heavy-handed. I just wanted to watch a movie right now, or I just want to read a comic, but it's a case by case sort of thing. But I know that like I've never read anything that made me go, white supremacy isn't that bad. I've never read anything that made me go, oh yeah, these Comicsgate guys, they got it right on point. Diversity is a bad thing, So I'm cognizant of the fact that, most people are rigid in their thinking, even when they claim to be flexible in their thinking, right? Like I say to myself, I'm an open-minded individual, but I'm not so open-minded that I am going to, listen to somebody defend whether it's white supremacy or child abuse or sexual assault. Like, I'm not that open-minded, it's like, if you're going to accuse me of being closed-minded because I say, yeah, sexual harassment is bad. Okay, I guess I'll be closed-minded. It swings both ways. The door swings both ways, and we have to be really careful when we think about some of these things. I do think it's important, though, that, and this is where it's really important, it's not about trying to win over the hearts and minds of those that we may never win over. It's about bolstering the hearts and minds of the people who are already there or who are looking for it, right? So I think to myself, I just watched this little thing with Lin-Manuel Miranda where he was talking about, how representation for him, if I can't remember how he said it, but he said something like, "Oh, if there had been better representation when I was a kid growing up, maybe I would have been president of the United States by now," right? And I thought that this was really interesting because I was like, and that's what I'm talking about bolstering, right? It's there's going to be changes in that. If I can create a comic or write a book that helps somebody realize their potential, helps them back up and reinforce what they believe in, shows them that, okay, I'm not crazy, I'm not the only one that's out there, whatever, then it might make it a little bit better for the next generation, and it might make the struggles that we endure a little bit easier to endure. The Black Panther as a movie never would have gotten made if The Last Dragon hadn't gotten made 30 years before, right? And a lot of people can't see the direct correlation between, Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon and Black Panther. But it's like, to me, it's so obvious, right? And that's where it all comes in. And that's where I think diversity, representation are crucial. And it's where I think we need to work harder to be more inclusive, right? So, it shouldn't just be about having more Black characters, and it shouldn't be about having more trans characters or anything like that, although it should be. But the key is making sure that those characters are people, are well-rounded human representations, and not just some sort of tokenism or, some straight guy going, "Oh, I want to be really edgy, so I'm going to have my lead be a transgender woman, and and that'll win chicks over," whatever. It's like,
yeah.
No, don't do that. If you want to have a transgender woman as your lead, great, do that. But write that character as a human being, and talk to some transgender folks and get to know them as people, so that you're not just writing, because well, I can't speak for anybody else, but I know when I'm watching something or reading something and I'm like, oh yeah, this person's never known a Black person. It's like, you can tell. It's like, and I don't want to knock other creators, but I've actually gotten into some pretty heated arguments with other creators and editors where I'm like, how many Black people do you know? Like, how many gay people do you know? Because it seems to me like you don't know any. Like, if your entire perception of like of queer life is watching Will and Grace,
yeah.
And
so funny.
And again, it's not to knock Will and Grace, but it's like, hey, there's more nuance to humanity than a lot of stuff shows us. So I do think it's crucial, but I don't believe it's crucial for the same reason some other people think it's crucial. I don't think it's crucial. I question the legitimacy of educating someone who just doesn't want to be educated. But I think it's without measure, great to help people see themselves, see the potential in themselves, see the greatness in themselves. I was just on a discussion with for the upcoming stay-at-home Comic-Con thing, and I was on a panel with Travis Rivas, who's a great creator, and a lot of his stuff deals with ableism and folks that have different body issues, different health issues, and he was talking about that. He was like, just the need to see characters that are like yourself and not treated as like a freak or a weirdo, and it shouldn't just be the X-Men. You know what I mean? It shouldn't just be
Yeah.
like going, oh, I relate to the X-Men because they're all freaks and weirdos. It's like, no, it's, there's only so far you can go when you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally Nightcrawler, dude. It's like, no, you're you're not Nightcrawler. You're not. I mean, and that's not to say I'm not knocking the X-Men. I love the X-Men, but it's we shouldn't have to reach that far. When
Right.
I was a kid, the character I related to the most was Mr. Spock, right? And I think it's pretty sad that like a 7-year-old kid is like, Mr. Spock is the character that speaks to my experience and at that point in my life more than any other. It's like, yeah, because I'm never going to get to go to Vulcan. Vulcan isn't home for me, so.
Yeah. Yeah. One more thing I wanted to ask about the Black Lives Matter movement that's been sweeping across the country. I was wondering how that has affected you on a personal level, because I feel like if I can use my platform at all to kind of talk about it, that's kind of what I want to do. So I wanted to ask you.
It's interesting because, I'm a little bit older, and I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Rodney King protests after those cops were let off in the Rodney King case, and cities erupted in protest. Um, and I look at it, I look at everything that's going on, and I get it, and I understand it, and I support it. And but I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm also kind of tired, you know. Um, and I have a graphic novel coming out next year. It's a nonfiction. It's the history of the Black Panther Party. It's the follow-up to my book on the life of Frederick Douglass. And, I spent the better part of 2018 and 2019 researching that Black Panther Party book, researching, writing it, and just steeped in not ancient history, but history, that's only going back 50, 60 years for the most part. And it's a history of police brutality and fighting back against systemic oppression. And like when George Floyd was killed and the first outbreaks of protesting and violence occurred, and the police started beating up people and buildings started burning in Minneapolis. And I was like, yeah, this all makes sense. This has all been done before. It's all been, like, and I knew about a lot of stuff before I did research for the Black Panther Party book. The thing that's interesting to me is like what's the outcome of this Black Lives Matter movement? Like because we can't go back to business as usual, right? And I think that with the pandemic, there's this realization that there is no going back to business as usual, not in the immediate future. I mean, I think even some of the most optimistic of us who, and I'm not talking the naively stupid optimistic people who were like, oh yeah, this is going to go away in a miracle in 2 weeks. Even myself thought, okay, by May, things will kind of be getting back to normal. And it's like, nope, it's not. And
Yeah.
I really, I remember thinking early on going, okay, they're not going to cancel San Diego Comic-Con, but I'm not going to go. I mean, that was the decision that I had made, but I honestly never thought they would ever cancel it. And then it became really clear, like, oh, they're going to have to cancel this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's like, well, where do we go from here? Because normal didn't work, and I don't want to go back to the way things were. And so when I look at Black Lives Matter, I think to myself, okay, well, what are the goals of this movement, and how do they align with not just making issues of race better, but it's also issues of class. I mean, I was just reading a story about a kid who was killed. When I say kid, he was like in his 20s. This is about a year or two ago. He was killed by the cops. He was a white kid, and he was tased 50 times by the police. And it's like, okay, see, this isn't just, we can talk about there was like about 300 black folks that were killed by the police in 2019. But there was over 1,000 that were killed, period, by the police, meaning not just black folks. We're talking Asian folks and Latino folks and white folks. That oppression knows no limits, right? That brutality. We saw cops in Buffalo, New York, beat the shit out of a little old white man, right? So it's like, so I think the question becomes like, okay, how do we tackle this problem? Because if we can figure out how to deal with the systemic racism and oppression that makes it crucial for us to say Black Lives Matter, and if we can get the country as a whole to recognize that Black lives do in fact matter, that there is a disparity and that there's differences in how people are treated, like that's the biggest elephant in the room. Like if we can tackle that, then I think that we can tackle some of these other things. But we can't just go, okay, we're not going to have white actors do the voices of black characters in animation anymore. We can't just go, oh, we're going to paint Black Lives Matter on the streets. It's like all that stuff. Yeah, if Pepsi wants to hire a bunch of black executives, fine. And if Netflix wants to get some black TV programming, fine. But that's not the core of the real problem. That's, like I said, that bolsters the heart and minds of people like myself, people like yourself. But, the people that are waving their Blue Lives Matter signs or who are pulling guns on black folks in a parking lot because for whatever reason, they're not watching any Ava DuVernay stuff on Netflix. They're still convinced the Central Park Five did it, even though it's been proven they didn't do it. So I don't know what the outcome is. I just know we just have to keep doing it, and I don't know how to do much of anything other than make comics. So just make comics, and in some of the worst times in my life, I have sought shelter in comic books or in film, right? And so at the very least, I can build a shelter for other people when they need to get away from all that stuff, because you can only do it so much, it's like, I haven't watched the George Floyd video. I didn't need to see it. I didn't, the stuff with Elijah McClain out of Colorado. I don't need to see it. I don't need to listen to it. I'm old enough now that it's like, yep, seen it. I've heard it. This is just the same soup reheated and there's cat piss in the soup. I don't want it anymore. But that's just me. Other people need to watch that stuff, but it breaks your spirit after a while, and it makes, for me, it makes the struggle harder to do when your spirit is getting crushed like that, and it's not to say you turn a blind eye to it and you ignore it. You have to keep informed, but it's like, there was some other police brutality video that was going around the other day, and I was like, everybody I knew was tweeting it and posting about it. I was like, why do I need to see this one? Did it end different? Did the cops get fired and arrested and go to prison for murder? Nope. Okay, then that's the one I'll watch. I'll watch the one that really changes it. If the cops who killed George Floyd get sentenced, at least the lead one gets sentenced to life in prison for what he's charged with, 2nd-degree murder, I think, or something like that. Then maybe I'll watch the video, because that's the only way I can know, okay, yeah, this was more than just watching like a snuff film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
not to get too heavy-handed, but yeah.
No, yeah, I just, it's a lot to process. I mean, I try to, I know what's happening, but at the same time, I try not to allow it to overtake my mental state, because it's not just, also the pandemic. I mean, you can go on Facebook for 10 minutes and your feed is flooded with the cops have killed somebody else. Yeah. Somebody else is starting some shit with somebody because they don't want to wear their fucking mask. It's just, the world that we're living in is just insanity. And I just do the best I can to shelter my daughter from as much of it as I can,
Yeah.
because it's just it's insanity. I don't know how else to describe um, what we're dealing with in today's society right now. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the Black Panther party book that you're doing.
Yeah.
I saw you announce that. I was like, dude, that's again like the timing perfect.
Yeah.
I'm super stoked to read it. I think there definitely needs to be more books like this in publication. I just read King by Hoche Anderson.
Yeah. Yeah. Great book.
Unbelievable. I mean, I was talking to my friend Dylan, and I was like, dude, you could literally slap the year 2020 on some of these conversations, some of these scenes, certain scenes, and it's like the same shit. It's
Yeah.
just, it's insanity. I mean, the book was so powerful that I had to like put it down a couple times, sit back, and then come back to it because I just like it's very heavy.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, if you could talk a little bit about your Black Panther Party book, and if maybe do you plan on doing more projects like this? Do you have ideas for other ones that maybe you want to do?
Yeah. Well, the Black Panther Party book is coming out through 10 Speed Press. They did the Life of Frederick Douglass. That's who I worked with on that one. Marcus Kwame Anderson is the artist on it, and he's honestly one of the best artists I've ever worked with. The collaboration has been amazing. It was a very challenging book. When I was working on Frederick Douglass at the time, I always wanted to do more nonfiction, and I had wanted to do something about the Black Panther Party for a long time, but I always wanted to do something specifically about Chairman Fred Hampton, who was the head of the Illinois Party, and I had mentioned it in passing to my editor at 10 Speed at the time. When Frederick Douglass was done, I had a deal for another nonfiction book, so we were talking about what it could be, and Patrick at the time said, well, we're interested in doing the Black Panther Party, and I was like, yeah, well, I'm only interested in doing Fred Hampton, and he raised a really good point. He was like, well, the Fred Hampton story is only, he didn't say it was only compelling, but he said it makes more sense and it's more compelling if it's told within the context of the entire Panther Party. And in that moment, I realized, oh, I might never have an opportunity again to even address any of this stuff. So, take what you can get and run with it.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was working on the Panther book, it was very draining. And I said to myself, I don't know if I can do anything this serious again, but I do want to keep doing nonfiction. Like if I could do one or two nonfiction graphic novels a year, I'd be happy as a pig in shit. It's like, I really love doing it. And there's a bunch of ideas that I have, but more than anything, I would like to see that become a more viable form for other creators, and then see other editors and publishers take it seriously. And, and so I keep thinking about like, okay, well, I have a list of like maybe 10 or 15 people I would love to see graphic novels about, but it doesn't mean I'm the one to write them, because you get something heavy like Frederick Douglass or the Black Panther Party, and you're lucky if you got a year to write it. And a year really isn't a lot of time to write something, like Ron Chernow, who wrote the Alexander Hamilton biography, spent years working on that. And so as much as I'd love to do something about Ida B. Wells, I know that it would take me a year and a half, 2 years to do the research, do the writing. And that's a year and a half or so that I'd be out of circulation in doing anything even remotely similar to that. So I need to pick and choose my nonfiction stuff pretty carefully. But I'd like to, if possible, and I'm not sure how to do it, I'd like to be part of like what I think is going to be a growth in nonfiction, and whether it's I can help other people break in, whether it's I can talk to publishers and editors and go, look, this is what we learned in our process. You can't necessarily treat a nonfiction graphic novel the same way you would treat you're doing the new Star Wars series or something, you know,
Right.
and I think artists need to it's literally a completely different business model than working in comics. You're still basically working in the same medium, certain aspects of the same industry, but the business model is so completely different that it's not set up to work and to last the way it needs to. So that's part of what I'd like to do. I mean, I definitely have a list of individuals and subjects that I want to do, and I've actually mapped out anywhere from 5 to 7 years worth of material. Like I feel like, again, the next heavy book, you know, like you could do a graphic novel on the history of lynching in America, right? But I'm not the guy to write it, you know, and I'm not the person to read it even at this point in my life. But I do think it's needed, you know. I do think that and I thought about, like, I was like, oh, what would a there's like a Black History for Beginners book that's a sort of a graphic novel, but it's pretty old. And I thought, okay, if I were to redo it, if I were to do something along these lines, like, you know, the history of Black people in America 101 as a graphic novel, what would that look like? How would I make that work? How would I present that? And in the back of my head, it's on in the little notebook of ideas. But am I the guy to do it? I don't know. I mean, there's other people out there. There's, you know, I'm not the only person. You know, just like, you know, Ho Che Anderson, you know, with his Martin Luther King book. I mean, how long was it between that book and my Frederick Douglass book, right?
Yeah. And even how long it took him to do that book. I looked in I researched how long it took him. Like, he took breaks because then he went to work for Milestone. And then, like, you can see the jump in his art style, too. So I know those are, I can imagine, because you're dealing with facts. So you have to make sure you're getting them right. So I can imagine the research that you've had to do on these two projects. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, I was approached about a year and a half ago to do a very well-known person within American history and Black history in particular, and it was someone who I would have killed to do a book on, right? But it was the time frame, how long they wanted it, you know, from writing to completion of the art was off. The financials were way off, and this person, even though they're not alive, they have family members that are still alive, and those family members wanted a certain amount of creative control and input. And it was just like, yeah, no, I can't do this book. It needs to be done, but it ain't going to be by me. And, you know, and that was, like I said, that was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. It was right as we were negotiating the Black Panther Party book. And so I was like, okay, whichever, you know, this other one is, and at the time I foolishly thought the Black Panthers would be easier. So shame on me for being an idiot. But I remember thinking, okay, yeah, that was the moment for me. It was like, yeah, nobody really knows what they're doing in this world, you know, in this particular corner of the industry. Nobody is getting it. And I had some long conversations with Andrew Iden, who co-wrote March with John Lewis, and Nate Powell did the art. And we were just sort of talking about the differences between this particular world, this nonfiction world of comics, graphic novels, versus working at Marvel or DC, versus also just graphic novels as a whole. And yeah, it's a completely new world. I'm that's one of the things about the future that I'm excited about, because it's something that's like, oh, maybe I can do some good here, you know?
Yeah, I'm excited. I love nonfiction work. History was always one of my favorite subjects, so I love being able to take history and comics, put it together, and have it presented in this way. It's definitely awesome and unique. I know you also are doing work at DC. I know you just started co-writing Young Justice, I believe, with issue 14. Maybe I'm wrong by 13.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm off by number. Sorry.
That's all right. Because I don't even know what number we're working on right now, to be honest.
Yeah, and then I just wanted to ask if you could talk about what that's been like so far, and then when is Naomi coming back?
That's a great question. I'll go in reverse order. I don't know when Naomi is coming back. Brian and I have talked about it a lot, and the key is that we both want Jamal to come back, and we want to work
Yes.
with him. And he's tied up with Far Sector right now,
Oh, such a
and
good.
it is. It's a great title, and I wouldn't want to pull him off of it. And I really have no interest in doing Naomi without him. It would take a lot of convincing for me to do otherwise. So I don't know. But Brian and
Okay.
I have talked about it, and we've got ideas mapped out. So I think it's not a question of if so much as it's a question of when. And Young Justice has been a fun experience. It's been an interesting experience because it's different than Naomi working with Brian on this. You know, I came on board. He was already there. Weren't the first 12 issues weren't out yet, but it was pretty close. And I think issue 9 or 10 had just come out when we started talking about me collaborating with him. And it's like I love the characters, but you know, it's like, oh, wait a second, yeah, there's okay, which Superboy are we writing? You know, and
Yeah.
I like my encyclopedic knowledge of superheroes isn't as deep as I'd like it to be at times. And you know, we're looking at like we're working on you know, with like Wonder Girl. There's a storyline we're doing with Wonder Girl, and I was like, in my mind, Wonder Girl is still Donna Troy, right? In my
Hmm.
mind, Robin is still Dick Grayson, and you know, because I'm that old, right? And and it's just interesting because it's like I our work on that book together is a lot of us coming up with the plot together, and then you know me mapping out scenes and things like that, and then Brian really turning it into gold, I guess, as it were. Like there's an issue that just wrapped that was I remember when I gave him my outline or my draft of the script. I think it was only like 14 or 15 pages, which is shorter than what it needs to be or what it has to be. But it was also like, I know there's a bunch of stuff missing that I don't quite know how to put in. Like, because I knew some of the action was taking place in between issues of Action Comics and Superman and things like that. Like, okay, Superman's going to be in this issue, and there's going to be some interaction between him and Connor Kent, and um, these are these are books Brian's writing. So I'm going to come up with a very baseline scene, and that was really for me. It was really fun and really rewarding. And I honestly can't remember which issue it is. I think it's issue 18, maybe 17 or 18, and that was one of those ones where I felt like, wow, this really feels good. And to me, and you'd have to ask Brian this, it's that's where I feel like I'm at my best at Young Justice, but I don't feel like I'm at my best all the time on Young Justice, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
It's definitely one where I feel like I'm struggling to keep up with him, and not just him, but just the superheroics of it all. You know, like I'd be very happy writing a comic of just like, you know, Young Justice hanging out at a coffee shop, you know, like a version of like either Friends or Breakfast Club or something like that. And
Yeah.
um, you know, and my dream would be to do a whole issue. Like I actually have a whole issue that was like essentially Young Justice starring that the Breakfast Club, that '80s Brat Pack movie, you know, and the notes are there. I just haven't found a way to work it in yet. Um, and but it's been a great experience, you know, and being back at DC, I didn't have the best experiences, especially towards the end of my run on Cyborg, which was cut short by my choice. Um, but it's good to be back, and it's good to be back there and working with, you know, one of my best friends who
Hmm.
um, who respects me and respects the medium in a way that, you know, I sometimes question if other people do. But uh, yeah, so Naomi, I don't know. I don't know what's happening. I'll probably end up calling Brian this evening and going, you know, hey, what's happening with Naomi? And you know, he'll be like, I don't know. So, uh, but I do know, man, we have so much cool stuff in mind for her. So I hope we can do it, you know?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Are there any other projects you got in the works that maybe you can talk about or tease? Or is it just these other projects that we talked about are keeping you pretty busy?
Well, the stuff we're talking about is keeping me busy for sure. And excuse me. I've got some proposals that I put together for a couple nonfiction books. Um, I have a really big fiction graphic novel that we haven't signed the contracts for. It's like a 300-page book,
Oh,
and
wow.
um, and I won't sign the contract because we haven't agreed upon an artist, because we haven't agreed upon a schedule that could work for an artist or a pay rate that could work for an artist. So, and this has been negotiations for this book have been going on for about a year now, and no artists want to tackle it, and I understand why, and because it's so much work, and when you think about it, 300 pages is over a year's worth of work, and again, the way book publishers pay money is different than the way comic publishers pay money, and with book publishers the payment is very staggered, and it's usually broken up into three payments over the course of up to maybe 2 years. And when you look at those amounts, like nobody can really live off of it. So, so I don't know if that fiction piece will happen. And I've got like 3 or 4 fiction pieces that are original things that I think I would either publish myself or try to find a book publisher for, as opposed to, because Image is right now. I'll go on record and say Image is the only, you know, publisher that does, creator owned stuff in some capacity that I have any interest in working with inside the comics realm.
Mm-hmm.
I would do licensed work work for hire for, Boom. I do in a heartbeat. If the right thing came along, I work with Dynamite, IDW, any single one of them. I would work with on a property in a work for hire sort of setting. But in terms of taking my own stuff to somebody, and and I know it sounds kind of mercenary to say it that way, but if
I
you
don't think so.
if you don't get it, if you don't understand that, you know, you're, putting in maybe years of your life for just a little bit of money, and then somebody wants to control the IP, and you know, I mean, I've heard the horror stories of people who work with certain publishers, and the film deals have fallen apart because of something that the publisher did,
Mm-hmm.
or because of the deal that they have. Whatever production company in Hollywood they're aligned with, and it's like, nope, I don't. Myself personally, I don't need that kind of headache. I've got a good lawyer, I've got a good agent, and I've got a good development partner in Hollywood. So it's like, yeah, maybe I could benefit by working with some of these comic publishers more, but I don't think so. They have yet to
Yeah.
prove it to me. So I just, if that's arrogance and that's that ego that I'm talking about, that's what makes me so difficult to work with, is that attitude of like, I had a publisher come to me and offer me a certain amount of money, and I just looked at him and I said, I can raise like at least triple that on Kickstarter in a month, right? And they had nothing to say, and I was like, you've offered me a $3,000 advance, which is meant to cover myself, an artist, an inker, and a colorist, and a letterer. $3,000 isn't going to get us much, and then you want to own 15% of the property, and you want to be the one in charge of shopping it. And that was what they hated, actually. And I looked at them and I was like, $3,000, huh? Okay. And I raised 20 on Kickstarter, and I moved, just in the pre-orders on Kickstarter, I moved more units than this particular publisher has moved with anything else. And I was
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah, I screwed up doing the postage, and I got to correct that mistake later today, or later this week. But they're my mistakes, man. If I fail, it's because I failed. it's not because the marketing department at, and I don't want to call out any publishers by name, but it's because the marketing department didn't do their job right, or couldn't figure out how to sell it, or they didn't know, they didn't have a good game plan for social media. If that's going to hit me, let it be because I did it, not because somebody else, screwed the pooch.
Right. All right. Well, before we get out of here, I was wondering if you wanted to throw out any plugs for anything, where we can find you on social media.
Yeah.
Anything like that.
Well, I've got, the best place to find me is I have a website, which is davidfwalker.com, which the guy who I've hired to update it hasn't updated it recently. But that takes you to my Instagram and my Facebook and my Twitter, which I'm trying to cut back on all that stuff because it is so time consuming. And really it's, the big things I want to promote right now, it's Bitterroot. Issue 9 comes out really soon. Then issue 10, the trade paperback, will be out later this year. The Hated is going to be out. People are going to be reading it within the next week and a half. Yes. I don't know if they're going to be able to order it on my website or not. It's driving me nuts. I got to call up the guy and yell at him. And then One Fall. I'm gonna wrap up One Fall. Get cracking on that. And like I said, I'd like to complete One Fall and the Hated before the year is up. And then I would, because I'm not going to self-publish anything else until I finish those. It doesn't make any sense to do anything else. And then I'll rethink the strategy of solid comics, because it is really, really hard. It's, you spend 12 hours putting together these Kickstarter packages and printing out, the postage, only to realize you didn't print out the right amount of postage, so you got to buy more, and you're only 25% way through everything, and it's like, holy shit, this is, okay, now I get it. This is why people hire other people to do this stuff. Yeah. And honestly, if it wasn't for the pandemic and the sort of the financial, not just the social distancing, but the financial straits it's put me in, I would have just hired a whole team of people to do this, and it would have been done in a day. But yeah, sometimes you need to build character.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for taking time out of your schedule to chat with me. It's been a pleasure, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely look forward. Can't wait to do this again with you sometime.
Yep, and hopefully I'll be down in your neck of the woods at some point, as soon as it's humanly possible. It's like, that's the big thing. Even if it's not a convention, I've got family down there, and I want to get down to LA for a little while and visit and hit some of the shops and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I look forward to it, man.
All right, yeah, definitely. Take care.